We like to believe that our reality is solid. We trust that the ground beneath our feet is real, that the walls of our homes are unbreakable, and that physics always obeys the rules. But what if reality is nothing more than a poorly coded software? And what if, just like a video game, you could accidentally slip through the collision barriers of the physical world? It was exactly 3:15 a.m. on a stormy Tuesday in Seattle. The rest of the world was fast asleep, but Ethan was awake, staring intensely at his dual monitor setup. As a senior systems engineer, his life revolved around finding bugs in complex digital networks. He was running a deep structured data simulation when suddenly, his computer monitors began to flicker violently. The crisp digital display distorted into jagged green lines, and an unknown hexadecimal code began to cascade down his screen like a waterfall. Ethan reached out to unplug the power source, but before his hand could touch the cable, a sickening sensation hit his entire body. The air pressure in the room dropped instantly, making his ears pop. The solid hardwood floor beneath his office chair suddenly lost its density. It felt soft, like liquid mud. In a fraction of a second, Ethan didn't just fall, he slipped through the solid matter of the floor entirely. He no-clipped out of human reality. When he finally opened his eyes, the smell hit him first. It was the suffocating, stale stench of damp, ancient, rotting carpet. He gasped for air, pushing himself up from the floor. He wasn't in his apartment anymore. He was standing in an endless, labyrinthine maze of interconnected rooms. The walls were covered in a sickly, monochromatic, faded yellow wallpaper. Overhead, rows of industrial fluorescent lights hummed with a maddening, relentless intensity. He had just entered level 0 of the Backrooms, and there was no door back home. Panic is the first thing that kills you in the Backrooms. Ethan knew this from the pure, primal instinct screaming inside his chest. He turned around, desperately clawing at the yellow wallpaper where his floor should have been. But there was only solid, endless drywall. Every direction he looked revealed the exact same view. Empty rooms, sharp corners, and that nauseating yellow hue. Hours began to blend into what felt like days. There were no windows, no clocks, and no natural sounds, just the infinite maze. Most people who trap themselves here lose their minds within the first few hours, running blindly until their hearts give out. But Ethan was a coder. His brain was trained to look for structure in chaos. As he walked miles through the identical corridors, marking his path by tearing small pieces of the damp carpet, he noticed something bizarre. The unbearable buzzing of the fluorescent lights wasn't a constant, steady noise. It had a rhythm. He stopped walking and stood perfectly still under a flickering light bulb, holding his breath. Psst, 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 psst. Silence. Then it repeated. It wasn't a mechanical malfunction. It was a transmission. Ethan pulled out his smartphone. Amazingly, the phone was still on, though it had absolutely zero cellular network or GPS signal. He opened a basic coding application and began to log the intervals of the light's flickers, translating the long and short buzzes into binary code, ones and zeros. As the data populated his screen, his blood ran cold. The Backrooms wasn't a supernatural dimension or a spiritual purgatory. It was a living, processing, cosmic simulation, and the lights were broadcasting the system's core data directly into the rooms. But just as the first line of code began to compile, a heavy, wet, dragging sound echoed from the dark corridor right behind him. The temperature in the room plummeted until Ethan could see his own, breath misting in the stale air. The relentless buzzing of the lights seemed to dim, drowned out by a sound that made his skin crawl. The sound of wet, metallic joints scraping against the walls. Ethan slowly turned his head. Emerging from the shadows of a distant pillar was something that defied human anatomy. It was a towering skeletal figure, nearly 9 feet tall, constructed entirely of distorted, black wire-like tendrils. It had no face, yet Ethan knew it was staring directly at him. Every nerve in his body commanded him to run, but terror glued his shoes to the carpet. The entity didn't rush him immediately. Instead, it tilted its distorted head, its twisted black fibers twitching violently. That's when Ethan looked down at his smartphone. The hexadecimal code on his screen was flashing in perfect, terrifying synchronization with the creature's irregular, raspy breathing. In that horrific moment of realization, Ethan understood the true nature of the entities in the Backrooms. They weren't demons, and they weren't random monsters. They were the antivirus programs of this broken reality. The system had detected an anomaly, a human being who had clipped into a secure server where he didn't belong. To the simulation, Ethan was nothing more than a malicious bug, a corrupted file that needed to be permanently deleted from the hard drive. The entity let out a deafening, screeching metallic roar that shattered the glass of the nearest fluorescent light. The corridor plunged into partial darkness, and the creature charged toward him with impossible speed. Ethan turned and sprinted blindly into the yellow maze, his life depending on every single step. Ethan ran until his lungs felt like they were on fire. He dove around sharp corners, slid through narrow doorways, and scrambled across the damp carpet, hearing the metallic screeching of the virus echoing right behind him. The creature was tracking his digital signature. In a desperate bid to hide, Ethan squeezed his body into a tiny, narrow gap between two overlapping drywall panels, pressing his back hard against the cold concrete structure hidden behind the wallpaper. He covered his mouth with both hands, trying to silence his frantic breathing. The shadow of the wire creature stretched across, the yellow floor just inches away. From his hiding spot, it hovered there, vibrating, searching the air for the glitch. Knowing his time was running out, Ethan looked down at the glowing screen of his phone. The binary data he had captured from the lights had finally finished decoding. A single stark line of text was flashing in bright red letters across his screen. It read, "Critical recovery error. To force system exit. Execute reboot at corner 404. A reboot command. The simulation had a backdoor, a manual reset switch built into its architecture. If he could find the specific coordinate labeled corner 404, he could force the simulation to eject his physical body back into the real world. But as Ethan looked out from his hiding spot, he faced a hopeless reality. There were millions of corners in this infinite space, and every single one looked exactly the same. How do you find a specific glitch in an infinite maze before the antivirus deletes you? Suddenly, his phone screen glitched again, and his own shadow on the wall began to behave unnaturally. It wasn't pointing away from the remaining fluorescent light. Instead, his shadow was stretching completely independent of the laws of physics, pointing directly toward a dark, flickering wall on his left. The code was guiding him, or perhaps it was luring him into a trap. The screeching returned, closer now. The entity had detected the signal from his phone. With no other choice left, Ethan broke out of his hiding spot and ran toward the dark, flickering wall where his shadow had pointed. The entity burst through the corridor, its black wires expanding to fill the entire hallway. It was right on his heels. Ethan didn't slow down. He locked his eyes on the vibrating yellow wallpaper ahead, gritted his teeth, and threw his entire body weight against the solid wall. There was no impact. The moment his skin touched the wallpaper, the solid matter dissolved into millions of pixelated glowing particles. Ethan felt himself falling through a freezing, infinite black void. The screeching of the monster faded away, replaced by a profound, terrifying silence. He felt his consciousness drifting away, spinning through the digital ether, expecting to finally wake up dead or back home. A sudden gasp of air rushed into his lungs. Ethan opened his eyes. He was sitting in his office chair. The warm morning sun was streaming through his apartment window in Seattle. The birds were chirping outside. His dual monitor setup was running smoothly. He checked his hands, his chest. His clothes, everything was dry, completely free of the damp carpet smell. He let out a breathless, euphoric laugh. It was over. He had executed the reboot. It was all just a horrific nightmare. But then Ethan noticed his computer screens. The complex software program he had been coding last night was completely gone. Instead, both of his monitors were displaying a single continuous window. It was a live, high-definition CCTV security feed of a sickly, mono-yellow corridor with a damp carpet. And there, walking down that endless hallway on his screen, was a terrified, exhausted man who looked exactly like him, holding a glowing smartphone. Ethan tried to move his arms to close the window, but his body wouldn't respond. He looked down and realized his hands were turning into lines of green hexadecimal code. He hadn't escaped the Backrooms at all.